Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Straight Out of BPS podcast with Rudy and Jamari. I am Rudy Luders, and as usual, in this journey with me is the one and only.
Jamari Jones, everybody.
How you doing
Glad
today, brother?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. Glad to be here.
No, man. 11th episode.
Let's go.
Let's go. The school year is coming to a close.
Mhm.
Summer is here. Um, yeah,
And we outside, baby.
we are outside. It's been it's been a long road. I think people are saying we're back to normal. I
hmm
don't like what is normal, a new normal.
Yeah.
There's still things we need to address. There's still things going around the country, the world, but it feels good not to be where we were at the beginning of the pandemic.
Right, right.
You know, I think it's okay to feel a sense of relief.
Yeah, I think that, you can definitely see the shift of what's going on with people, like their moods and
Yeah,
just everyone's a lot more happier, one, because of summer, two, because,
yeah,
people are getting to interact with everyone again. So it's good, man. It's good. We're not completely back, but
yeah,
I can say definitely is getting there. Um,
yeah.
so I'm excited for summer.
Definitely.
I'm excited also just to take a break. So
Yeah. Same.
um,
Same.
yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Um, you know, um, Protect your peace.
hmm
Find your joy. Joy is an act of resistance. So, all that, your mental health, all that, take time for yourself. I know all that. So, what we got today?
So before we get into that, right? Thank, first of all, I always like to start off with some thanks before we get into the news. Thank you guys for
Yeah.
listening. Please share our podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, um, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, everything. Follow us on
Hey.
Facebook. We
Yeah.
appreciate our listeners. Again,
Yeah.
we believe in this podcast so much and the things that it can do for others as well as for ourselves. Um, so thank you. Share with a friend. We appreciate the support. Look forward to doing some more amazing things with my brother Rudy. So
Same,
thank
brother.
yes, sir. So
Yeah.
let's get into this views from from our latest news.
What do we got? What do we got?
Um, all right, we got a lot of stuff, bro. It's a lot of stuff happening. So you remember the investigation on the issue that BSAC, Boston Student Advisory Council, brought up. There was a student that brought up like he wasn't being listened to, like
Mm-hmm.
it was very unfair. So it turns out that our superintendent is expand the investigation on what's into unlicensed counseling that was going on within BSAC. And if you are interested in learning more about this for our listeners, please um, uh, view. You can look this up on like any like news outlet.
Yeah. I
We
think
do.
there's an article on the Globe or the
Yep.
Boston Herald.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So please do your own research as well. Don't take our complete, you know,
Yeah. Well, we are still doing our research,
yes.
because it's this is something major, and
Mm-hmm.
we are doing our research. We are asking questions, and
Mm-hmm.
as we know more and more unfold, we will bring it and have that conversation, and
Yep.
potentially have some people to share their story. But when those things happen, it's our job to investigate. It's
Yeah.
our job to find answers.
Yep.
We when you're trying to find answers, there's like there's usually three truth, like each side truth and the real truth.
Yeah.
It's for you to, as you gather evidence, realize that which, like, to paint the picture of the real
Yeah.
truth, regardless of like the vision, like, the stuff that we've read and found out, those are not cool. Like,
Yeah.
I think there was a thing talking about wrestling,
Yeah.
challenging, like, like a way for people to let their frustration. And we were talking that in our post production meeting, and you brought up that you do all of that, and then
There's
there's a
no.
mental health check-in after.
Yeah.
There's a lot of release, but not assess after.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So so what they're using, what the article talks about is they're using this unorthodox method of counseling. Me as a counselor, I'm all like if it's unorthodox, I get some of it, but
yeah,
when I read about like what it really is, it's called Reevaluation Counseling. And the advisory council or the leaders of the advisory council really encourage the students to share personal information in a group and discharge their emotions by crying, yelling, screaming, with no professional follow up. Twice monthly RC sessions, reevaluation counseling, took place in the basement of someone's home in Jamaica Plain, but some of the teens also participated in regional RC gatherings with adults and strangers. So, you doing all this with no mental health follow up is definitely a problem because you're just lashing out and there's nothing else being done. And this connects to, there's a particular person that engaged, well, didn't really engage. They were asked to engage in RC counseling in the form of wrestling to really get out his frustration, or get out their frustration of the racism that they experienced. And to me, that is like red flags. We should not be wrestling out our aggressions in no way, shape, or form, especially with young adults. That's a problem. Um, and so I'm glad that BPS is, or superintendent is investigating this issue, and I hope you know the students get justice as well as the correct counseling. But there should be more oversight of what people are doing and what people or leaders are implementing to use with our students. Like
yeah,
it's crazy.
definitely. Um, I so it's unlicensed counseling, so and you hear somebody's basement. So
Mhm.
it's definitely like red flag, like why are those things happening? And also Kimani James, a former B-Side student, called for the superintendent to resign
Yeah.
because um I think the program. I'm not sure if the program was suggested by her or by I don't know who, but it's all the things that we are paying attention when you're doing our research.
Mhm.
Worth mentioning, and before you guys do your own research, like we need to stay informed and not just hear the headline, see the headline, and make uh, and just run for it. So we need to understand.
Mhm.
Definitely, that situation is it's a no, no, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talking about calling for resignation, we have some other resignation
Mhm.
in BPS, right?
Yeah. So, Boston school committee member resigns over West Roxbury text messages. So we had Alexandra Olavier. Um, she was the Boston school committee chair, and she currently has resigned over text messages that were exposed. This is a direct connection to what we have talked about in the past as far as um, this situation with the exam schools, and since the pandemic, they're trying to figure out a better way to incorporate more students, or a fairer way of having students be admitted into these exam schools. And it's been a very hot button issue, especially with parents that live in certain zip codes. And now it since the committee is talking about, one, expanding the zip codes to so there's more people will able to take the exam and be admitted into the schools, and two, possibly rethinking the exam in itself to be more fair. But to come back to what's happening, basically Alexandra, she first of all, these texts were like last year, and they're just now being exposed now. So they were suppressed for whatever reason, but it's funny how it's now coming up when we're about to vote about the exam. And so what's also interesting is that the texts, which were made public Monday, had quickly ignited a campaign trail with growing number of candidates from the mayor, city council calling for an ouster on Monday and Tuesday, and meaning that they were asking for her to, one, resign, and two, to an apology out. But this is in the article, this is what was said. The best school committee meeting ever. It's said by Alexandra to someone else via text. And then the reply was, "I'm not trying to cry. Wait until the white racists start yelling at us." Rivera texted the person that she was texting. "Whatever, they are delusional," texted Alexandra. "I hate WR meeting white racist." Yeah. She texted Rivera again in reference to West Roxbury. So, sick of Westy whites, Rivera replied, "Me too. I really feel like saying that," Alexandra said. And so we have experienced, I'm not saying that this is right? Like, I'm not saying that what she said is right, but I'm asking all of us to look a little bit deeper to see why she is feeling that way. We have also experienced people on the committee members making fun of Black and brown people's names, as well as making fun of like Asian names, and they have been reprimanded. I'm not asking that she not be held accountable, but I'm asking us to look deeper to why she is saying she hates white
West is white.
Yeah, Western whites. We have, and I know, Rudy, you have a personal connection to.
Well, it's not a personal, it's observation.
Yeah.
I think West is trying to separate themselves from Boston.
Yep.
Urban Science is gone. Westy.
Yeah.
Westy.
What? Well, West Roxbury.
Yeah, West Roxbury High is gone, so we have to ask ourselves, like,
and who went to those schools?
Went to those schools, and well, I've heard there's been a meeting where, because there's a couple of schools we're trying to open, not BPS school per se, we're trying to school who serve predominantly Black and brown student. We're trying to secure space in West Roxbury. So some of the pushback from having Black and brown school in those is like, one, their safety issue, their traffic, It's gonna be traffic. Who's gonna pay attention to those kids when they get out of school? So the language being used at those catering to the concern of some of the people of West Roxbury of having high school certain predominantly black and brown kids in the neighborhood is pretty alarming.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
and that's underlying racism, bro.
underlying racism.
It's not outward.
So, like, by no means I agree with the text that she sent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to investigate. So I feel like for a long time, Westie's trying to separate himself from Boston.
Yeah.
But at the same time, get the benefits of being part of Boston.
Yeah. So, and can we address that? You're still sending your kids into Boston, which is also creating traffic, right? Also,
no, where are they sending their kids? Where are the kids going?
Exam schools.
Exam school.
Yeah. So I'm on like, you're willing to send them there, but like you don't want our kids coming out into West Roxbury. Like that's a problem, man.
It is.
And in the article, you know, I'm not trying to justify what she said, but
no.
There's trauma there from I believe she grew up in West Roxbury, and she's Armenian and Nicaraguan. And she has said that she has faced racism in West Roxbury even after when she was growing up. And I think that constitutes to how she feels. Also, even after the text messages, she received racial threats and everything. But one, I wanted to put this out there again. This was a year ago. Why is it coming out now?
Well, timing is everything, and there's a purpose for everything. So.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, again, those are my point of view, what I observe. So knowing what I know, I would not have reacted the way she reacted.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that doesn't negate that we shouldn't look into those. And then I'm saying that this is the case for everyone in West Roxbury.
Yep.
But there's pattern that you need to look at. Yeah.
So the next item of discussion, so it's directly connected to what we just talked about. And we won't spend a lot of time on it because I feel like we have dived into it. New Boston exam school admission requirements might include interest tests and zip code allocations, which we were kind of touched up on. But I wanted to point out that they are also thinking about implementing what Chicago public schools do for exam schools. And I would read quickly what what they talked about. It says Chicago largely admits students into highly selective schools by putting students into tiers based on their characteristics of the neighborhoods where they live. The tiers consider medium household income, educational attainment, percentage of owner-occupied household, percentage of household where a language other than English is spoken, and percentage of families headed by the single parent. And so they kind of base their admission system around this. I think this is headed towards the right direction of fairness in like the admission process. And I hope that we can kind of like base our admission stuff off of kind of this system, because it seems I would like to do more research on like how Chicago public schools or like their private schools are doing as far as this admission process. But I just thought it was interesting that we might be looking into something like this. And also just to add that parents are not happy that more zip codes are being added to the admission allocation of these schools, because that means there's less seats.
Yeah.
So
I think for me, like, I need to dive in deeper up to the zip code to see who it affects more, and like, and there's clearly you can see that. But here's my thing: is the media present, and we talk about this like in our last episode with Andrea mentioned like the media presence at the exam school. I think one of the question, like when we talk about like trying to better BPS equity and BPS, we need to think about like all this fight to get into the exam school. The reason why is because we know parents know if their kids get into those exam school, there's a over 90% chance that they will be good, said because the school have the resource necessary to contribute to the success of their student.
right.
Having stated that, because of that, we put less emphasis on the rest of the school and the resource they need. If we spread the resource equity around, maybe people will not be fighting to get into those exam school and all that.
Yeah.
One and two, there's also two. So getting in and the added pressure on the kids who do not succeed in those exam school, how they look at, oh, you went to exam school and then you flunk or something.
Yeah.
The pressure, kids don't want to be there. So it's just like, let's spread it around. It's more like, I don't know. It's just like, there's only 20 schools. There's only so many students that can go to those schools.
Yeah.
And no matter how you change it, some people are gonna benefit something like So you saying like those exam school only smart kid can come there. I believe that everyone is born smart. Everyone is smart. One is a has your service cater to meet them where they at so they can properly achieve their potential. It's talk about resources, like how much of your um like level of intelligence that you tap into, but it's also developing skills that will allow you to tap into those. And if they are not, it's not our focus, and we're like, oh, we have 3 schools, we're gonna put all our resources, like and have everybody fight to get into this school, and the rest, like again, how many exam schools there are there, and how many BPS school total?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a 3 school, right?
Yeah, it's O'Brien,
Boston Latin School, and Boston Latin Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone else is just like
free for all.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that I feel like you touched on is that let's see what we can do with our resources when we invest it into our main public schools.
Like, yes, invest in Boston Public School.
Yeah, let's invest more. Let's reshape these schools and let's help them to be on the same caliber as the exam schools. And once we do that, I guarantee you the fighting will stop, man. Going into our last topic, our last topic, first time home buyer assistance in Boston expands up to 40,000. Kim Janey, our mayor, Kim Janey, announces.
This is major because we've been talking about who will benefit for equitable school system once with gentrification happening. I think this is something that Black and brown folks in Boston need to
take advantage of,
work and take advantage of, because this is what will allow. Even the mayor said that, like, she was able to get her first one with the assistant program. So we definitely need to dive in and making sure we are staying in Boston.
Yeah,
we are staying in Boston, take the classes, take Maha classes.
Yep.
There's the One Boston program, all those, making sure, because it is very important. Generational wealth starts with ownership, property, your house, all that. This is how you prevent gentrification. Financial wealth. It's time, people. Kind of like this is how we fight gentrification.
Yep.
Definitely take advantage of that. I think this was major.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, definitely need to talk to parents and students about that. Hey, have you seen this? Get into share what we need to stay because we need to reap the benefit of our labor. Like we are trying to create a equitable school system. We're gonna make sure we benefit when it happened from it when it happened. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm
Um,
I'm excited as well. Um, Boston is very expensive, and I think that this is definitely a step in the right direction. Um, and I hope that people will definitely take advantage of this, and people within the community take advantage of this to increase ownership and young professionals to stay in Boston um, and invest here and build up especially the Black and brown community that lives here already. So with that said, let's get into the meat of the episode.
so yeah, so it's our 11th episode. You know, we have another official. So we see for the past few episodes we have had multiple candidate. Well,
Mm-hmm.
she's not official yet. Well, she's a candidate. I think it's been important for us to have those conversations with those candidates and
Mm-hmm.
see where their plans are, especially with BPS. So there's an interconnection with everything, but we are focusing more on BPS. Also, even while we were having the conversation, we realized, oh, gentrification. So is it important? So everything we do is political.
Mm-hmm.
We can no longer be afraid to be political and have those conversations. I think me and you, Jamal, were both learning
Mm-hmm.
and growing in that thing. So it's been amazing and a learning experience talking to all those candidates and try to figure out their priority and how them being elected will change or not change our system. So on this episode, we are joined by a BPS alumni. She's a lawyer and an advocate, and she's a daughter of a Haitian immigrant. She's a candidate for city councilor at large, city not district at large, so the whole Boston.
Also,
So
Ruby, she was just recently, I just saw this the other day, she was just recently endorsed by the Boston Teachers Union.
recently endorsed by the Boston Teachers Union.
Yep.
So you may know what we're talking about now. So the next episode of Straight Out of BS podcast with Rudy and Jamari, we have City Councilor at Large candidate Ruthzee Louijeune.
Let's get it.
We are joined today by a BPS alumni, lawyer, and advocate, and City Councilor at Large candidate Ruthzee Louijeune. Thank you for joining us today, Ruthzee.
Thank you so much, Rudy. You're one of the first people to pronounce my name correctly. And I think you have a cultural advantage. So thank you.
Happy to do so. I know how hard we work and we want our name to be pronounced correctly. And also I gotta say that I've watched some of your interview. I like how the tutorial you give, the Louis Vuitton and the jam part.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. I love that.
Yep. You got to teach them somehow how to pronounce the Haitian last names, right?
Yeah.
So whatever tutorial it takes. So
definitely. So Ruthzee, growing up in Mattapan, Dorchester, and Hyde Park, it feels like for me, the Haitian community always get the short end of the stick.
yeah.
You're a daughter of Haitian immigrant.
Yeah.
Do you feel the pressure to represent the Haitian community? How do you plan on balancing your role with the policy that you support and the needs of the people that expect you to represent them?
That's a really great question, Rudy. I don't think I find it to be pressure. I think it's a privilege. I think the Haitian community here We've done so much and contributed so much to this city. It is a privilege to be able to be a voice that is elevating and amplifying the voices of the Haitian community. It is a privilege that I would get to represent Haitians in this way. Let me just say that representation isn't just limited to political representation. It is important. And I am very excited to be able to step into that role and be able to be a representative for the Haitian community. There have been trailblazers before, including Marie St. Fleur, the first Haitian American elected statewide, who I interned for at the age of 16. There's Linda Dersenafori. Right now there's a vacuum, and I'm happy to step in because Boston has the third largest diaspora of Haitians outside of Haiti. And so for us to be able to come and collectively use that power so that we can be represented, that is a source of pride for me. I look at folks like my father, who is a big member of the Haitian community, who has a television show, Telegalaxy. I look at Wilne Auguste, I look at Passe Kiki and Dr. Gabo. And then I look at the younger generation, Charlotte Lucien, all these people who have for many years and decades been doing work to bring the Haitian community together. And I look at the younger folks. If you look at City Hall, there are folks there like Winston and Rudney. And then you look at a lot of staffers in our city council offices, Brianna Miller, and we look at Ward 18, CC Graham, Maleka. Haitians are everywhere, right? We are in political spaces and let's not even talk about all the restaurant spaces, right? Rudy, you and I met at a pop-up where, young Haitian restaurateurs and entrepreneurs are really putting in that energy. We have in the fashion space, there are Haitian leaders, young leaders rocking it. So I am so privileged to be in this position, to be running on a platform where I am explicitly announcing myself as a Haitian American woman who can speak Creole, I've been to the island many a times, but, navigate the world as a Haitian American woman. Even when, there were times where it wasn't always so cool to be, saying I'm a Haitian American person, but I've always lived and walked in that pride because that's how my parents raised me. And so I step into this potential position with tremendous pride and want to just do right by my people.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you say that. And I say like short end of the stick because I feel like every neighborhood is so rich in the cultural or like the like they serve, but it feels like, well, somebody once told me that, like we have the Haitian, the Matabin should have a bigger Haitian culture, but it's not shown.
Yeah.
And it feels like because we always get the short end of the stick, it's like we don't own anything in Boston. We are here, but there's nothing like in a city that we can say like, it's Haitian, like in terms of like neighborhood pride.
Yeah.
And that's something like I was like, oh wow, like I never thought of it that way. Like I always like, man, when you hear Mattapan, you hear Haitian, but it's just like, but technically we don't own anything in Mattapan. So I'm happy.
There are businesses in Mattapan where there are Haitian-owned businesses, and there are progress. We see younger generations doing, shared workspaces in Mattapan Square. There's like, we're making progress. We have our Haitian restaurants, Le Foyer, Aubert Chaud, know what I mean? So we're out here. We're out here. Yes, we have so far to go. And I'm excited.
But we lost a lot too. We lost a lot of those businesses. So, so that's why when, so my parents, my mom and my stepfather are very involved in the community. Yeah. They have a show on Tele Boston. Every morning they have a show. I was having a conversation with my mom, like, hey, mom, do you know that we actually gonna have a Haitian immigrant representative? She was like, no, I didn't know. And we were having a conversation. I gave her some of your interviews to look at. And it feels like, and then the word is spreading out. So we're excited to have you as a Haitian myself.
Thank you. I feel like I've been on Tele Boston, but if I haven't yet, we're gonna make sure that happens.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. No, I'm excited.
And Jamar is Haitian by association, so.
Okay. So see, one thing about Haitians is that we welcome everybody. If you want to rep the flag, If you want to come to Flag Day waving your flag, we welcome you. We are a welcoming bunch as long as you want to celebrate in our richness and want to help us get to where we need to go. So
Yeah. No,
Jamari, welcome.
dude, I'm with it, whether you guys want me or not. I also work at Tech Boston Academy.
Yeah.
And like we have a big ELL and Haitian population. So this is something that is very much near and dear to my heart as well, because I feel like sometimes my students are not represented and policies that are going in place, especially when it comes to like BPS policy or school policy. Sometimes I feel like they are missing that section or that group of people. And I'm very thankful to have such a great counselor, Miss D, that is like takes care of that population so well. And she is also Haitian as well and has been doing a great job. So shout out to her. She was also the counselor of the year representing Boston.
I think I
So
saw that. That's
yeah,
great. That's
yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. Yeah.
So
And kudos to you for doing that really important work as a counselor for our kids. You know, we definitely need a lot more guidance counselors in our schools as our students continue to grapple with issues of mental health that just have only spiked with the pandemic, our young kids.
yeah,
The fact that, you know, I think the ratio for Boston Public Schools for it's like a 300-to-1 ratio guidance students per guidance counselor. Like, in what world is that okay? And when we look
yeah,
at our students and they're asking, we need more mental health help. Let's meet them there. Let's put more guidance counselors in our schools, because it's a hard world to be dealing with, you know, the pressure to get good grades. You know, kids have lived through so much change. We've lived through a pandemic, through economic recessions, through terrorist attacks. Never alone, like, the city is becoming even more unaffordable. So parents and families are, kids are watching their families get evicted, and that housing instability. So we need to make sure that our schools are a place not only where our kids can learn, but where they can also learn to deal with the difficulties of life and how you balance that with learning. And one way you do that is decrease that ratio, because you can't burn out our guidance counselors who are dealing with very large portfolios. So that's something that I look forward to working on, to see if we can look at that contract and make sure that we can try to bring that ratio down and hire more guidance counselors so our schools can really be a beacon for mental health for our students.
Well, you got my support there.
Thank you. No, but thank you seriously for the work that you do for our young kids. So
yeah, I love it. I love the work. So moving on to question 2, you are a big advocate for implementing vocational education in Boston. On your campaign website, you mentioned that you will use the Rhode Island model to invest millions in vocational education and require students to learn important business skills like budgeting and planning. Can you explain the Rhode Island model in implementing vocational education in Boston to our listeners, and why the model would work so well for Boston?
Yeah, we just need to make sure that we are creating spaces where we are being creative and thoughtful about responding to the vocational needs of our students, right? So we need to make sure that all of our kids, you grew up in Mattapan, that you know that college is an option for you. But you also need to know that, okay, maybe college isn't where my talents are going to be best used. Maybe that's not for me. Where's there a vocational track for you, right? Because you can graduate and become like a painter or become a carpenter, and you making a stable living for you and your family and your future family or your current family, right? So we need to make that opportunity available. I'm noticing, like, during a vote, this is an election year, so folks are always, knocking on Madison Park, but let's work on what works in Madison Park and help to grow it. So one of the things that they're doing in Rhode Island is that business leaders and community leaders and school leaders looking like our vocational programs aren't working. We need to make sure that we are graduating our students not only with the vocational training for their area of interest, but to make sure they have the business savvy to go with that. So the state invested, I think it was $5 million into revamping the vocational education in the state, so that, okay, you're interested in going into cosmetology, that's great, right? We're going to put you on the cosmetology track, but you're also going to learn entrepreneurial skills, and you're also going to know how to start a business so that you can go out maybe and start your salon, but also know how to budget, know how much you need to put aside to buy products, know how much you need to set aside for overhead costs, know how much you need to be charging for different hairstyles. Okay, I'm doing a weave for this person, I'm doing braids. Like, how do you price things? And I think it has to go hand in hand. Our schools, unfortunately, aren't doing the best job of giving our students those hard life skills about, like, okay, you are entering the world. How do you balance a budget, right? How do you balance your own budget? And now let's talk about how do you balance a budget for an impending business, right? Because you could give our kids, our young kids, our Black and Latinx kids the tools for success and let them choose, but help them along the way. And so I think that we can use that model at Madison Park, deep investments in, a track like cosmetology, and that's been woefully disregarded there right now, but we can strengthen that. How many hair salons we have in Roxbury, where these young kids can go and learn how to become the best hairstylist ever, and also learn how to start your own business. So let's make sure we're doing a better job of matching our students with internships, so that they can get the hands-on training and then become a boss, become your own boss. And so that's what we need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
I like how you said the life part, because that's something we talk about a lot. Like, a lot of our students, they're struggling at life. They do it well academically, but the thing about, once you leave high school is more structured, and then in college you have to create that structure for yourself. And then in college, because the structure, you're not well at creating structure for yourself, so while you're dealing with life, which impact your academic performance, because you weren't taught how to deal with life, and you're not good at structuring your day. So definitely, like, having our student, like, training our students life skills that can, like, help them, like, once they leave high school, is definitely the way to go, regardless if they're high achieving or not, because high achieving students are still failing in college, because life happened to everyone.
And also, like, whether you get A's or B's or C's or whatever on your report card does not translate to, like, how you're able to deal with, like, the realities of life. You know what I mean? I was talking to, like, my good friend's niece the other day, and she was talking about deciding between schools, and she was like, I'm thinking it might be better to go to this local college for a bit because it's a state school, I'll save money. And just the way that she was even thinking about cost and the cost benefit analysis, I was like, that you don't like, that is a savviness that you don't necessarily always learn in school, but our schools need to be teaching our kids, like, this is how you work, this is how you think about trade-offs, right? This is how you make pros and cons lists, how you make decision trees and stuff like that. So I mean, props to our kids, because they are thinking, they are learning the life skills, even when we're not giving them the tools. But let's do a better job at giving them the tools to prepare them for success, whether they end up in college, whether they end up going to on the vocational track, whatever it is that they choose to do. Let's give them the choice, but give them the structure so that they can make good choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
So during your interview with your Politic and Prosecco interview with Jaqueta, you mentioned that nowadays people have their own definition of equity, and that the definition of equity needs to be rooted in history.
Yes.
That
I'm glad you watched it, but that's so true. It's so true. Yeah.
One thing that you're fighting for is equity across all schools. So what would you say your definition of equity is? Do you believe that BPS can truly be an example of your definition of equity with the existence of the exam schools?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rudy. And I'm glad that you watched, because I forgot that I said that. But yes, equity and the definition of equity needs to be rooted in a historical understanding of what we've done wrong. When I use the royal we, not like the three of us on this Zoom right now, but the we in terms of the state and the government and the private market and individual actions, and how that has excluded and discriminated against a number of folks, Black folks, Latinx folks, people of color, indigenous people here, women. So I look at equity as a way of rooting it in history. It's corrective action that we need to take at the government level. I'm talking about government because that's where I am, but there's equity models for the private sector. There are equity models for the nonprofit sector. we have engaged, the state has engaged in intentionally discriminatory and racist practices against communities for decades and centuries. Now is a time where we need to be as intentional, more intentional about corrective action to correct for those historical inequities rooted in racism and discrimination. And so that's how I define equity. It's really important to start off on the same baseline, because we're not going to get to where we need to go if we don't all agree at where we're starting. And so I've had conversations where folks have had like this, they've tried to time limit what it means to work on equity, like how long we have to work on it. And I'm like, no, there's no time limit. We're correcting for centuries of inequities. And so we need to be partnered in the definition and in this marathon to get us to where we need to go. And a marathon, sometimes you don't know how long you're going to be running, but you know you need to run until you get to the finish line. And so that's how I look at equity. It's like all hands on deck to correct for where we, the state, the private market has done wrong when it comes to redlining, when it comes to blockbusting in our communities like Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, right? Rooted in that historical understanding of how we've stymied and prevented Black wealth, how we've, prevented women from being fully equal in the workplace, and how do we correct for that? So that's what equity means to me. Long definition, but I think you got to get it all in there to really, to get to where we need to go.
Yeah. I like, oh, go ahead.
So using that example, and you are a product of a exam school.
Yep.
So do you think that can truly be equity with the existence of the exam school?
Rudy, that's a great question. So exam schools start in the 7th grade, okay? So it's not as if from grade 1 to 6, we have equity, and all of a sudden you get to the exam schools and poof, no equity, right? I think the problem with our school system is inequity from the jump, right? When you look at kindergarten and when you look at universal pre-K and whether we're making that a reality for our students. So those deep investments that we're getting from the federal government as part of the COVID relief package, let's use that to make universal pre-K a reality by partnering with our family-based and center-based centers that are providing pre-K and expand that. Let's get 3-year-olds into universal pre-K. And the reason you do that, the sooner you get students and young kids into the educational pipeline, the better outcomes you'll have on alleviating and getting them out of poverty, of getting them getting them good meals, of getting their brains churning so they can start to think about what it looks like to be in a group and to live, even if you're 3 years old, to be in a democracy together as you're like trying to figure out with your fellow 3-year-olds, like whether the squares are fit in the circle or whether they, those little games that they play. So I think, the exam schools are definitely, don't get me wrong, they are 100% part of the equity conversation, right? Yeah. And you see the task force now is doing work to make our exam schools more equitable, which is 100% necessary. When I went to Boston Lions School, it was already a school that there weren't enough Black and Latinx kids. When you look at the percentages, the breakdowns of BPS students, Lions School turns that on its head. So of course you need to do everything you can to make sure that scrappy young kids, I look at Lions School as a school for scrappy kids. That's what it has been called. And that's what it always needs to be. It needs to be a school where, whether you're a young Black girl from a working class family in Mattapan, or, you're a white kid from a working class family in Charlestown, that your family's economic background, that your family's racial background do not present a barrier to your ability to access these schools. But we know that they do, because so much of what you're able to achieve in school as a young kid, sadly, is dictated by your parents' bank account, by legacies of historical discrimination. So you do need to take corrective action, again, equity lens here. And you do need to look at, okay, how are these exam schools barriers to entry for communities, for Black communities, for Latinx communities, for communities that live in, Charlestown or South, like how are we presenting barriers and how do we break those down? So yes, the exam schools are 100% part of the discussion on how we achieve equity. But it starts way before then. It starts in pre-K. It starts when they're 3 years old. We fix it then. We start then, and we continue onward.
With that, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Ruthzee Louijeune, candidate for City Councilor at large.
We are back with City Councilor at Large candidate Ruthzee Louijeune. So going on to the fourth question, your plan mentions the adoption of racial equity and allocating resources to schools, which you give a couple of examples, including extra tutoring and extended after school programming. Can you tell us more about the need for robust racial equity framework and what that looks like to you? Are there more examples of tools, initiatives, or programs that you would like to see BPS develop?
Yeah. So Boston Public Schools already, BPS already issued what they call a racial equity toolkit, basically for schools to use whenever they're making big decisions. Either there's form, you fill it out, and you're supposed to go through it and make sure that you are doing an equity analysis on the impact of these decisions. I think that's a good starting point. I think you need to build an accountability. So what happens if I, fill out this worksheet and I realize that the decision is going to have an inequitable result? What is the stick to get you and to get the school to make sure that they're working in a direction where that is not the case? And so we are starting to adopt an equity framework here at BPS, and it's happening. Started at the city council and it happened at City Hall with the creation of a chief equity officer, Carolyn Crockett, who was the first. We're starting to embed that equity framework into everything that we do. We just need to make sure that we are enforcing and have follow-up, so that it's not just lip service being paid to that idea of equity, so that we realize the role of Boston Public Schools and of the school committee in creating schools that were inequitable, right? And so in so doing, how do we correct for that? By intensifying the resources that we provide to schools in low income tracts, right? Schools that were run. I look at schools in Mattapan, schools that were once really strong and robust schools that have fallen by the wayside because they've been disinvested in, because the demographics of the neighborhood have changed, and all of a sudden the quality of your school changes. And so it's about deep investments in our neighborhoods where we know poverty is real, and that working families and poor families are grappling with just eating every day, right? If your family's grappling with just eating every day, that means to me that the school nearby is a school that we need to make sure is getting a lot of tender love and care with our taxes, with our budget, with our money. And especially coming out of the pandemic, that means intensive tutoring. That may mean like, hey, what does it look like to have a really intensive after school programs for our students? And how do we make sure that we are doing that in a way that is equitable? And you do that by looking at where we have intentionally disinvested in communities, and we reverse that trend.
Yeah, I definitely support after school. Like, for me, like, I never wanted to go home after school, so I would try to find any activity that was going on to stay. Even when I became an educator, I remember I would stay at work till 8 because I identified, like, because I know why the kids were staying in the school.
Yeah.
So creating that fun environment for them to stay extra hours and get them to their work was very crucial to them.
Yeah. I feel
I was
like
the same way. I never wanted to go home. I wanted to go play basketball. I wanted to just hang out with my friends. And so how do we bake that into our schools, right? So
yeah, I also feel like there's not enough like, I agree that the sports and like all that other stuff in after school programs. I wish we invested more in art programs for students to do after school. And I know so many students that don't want to, either play sports or they're good with academics, but they have a passion for art, music, or something like that. But we don't have that space to give them at the school.
Yep, 100%. And I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the Globe, I think 3 weeks ago, that basically proved that like kids, the way that you deal with things like lack of attendance in schools is by you increase arts offerings so that kids can have the opportunity to think creatively. You give folks options outside of, okay, they do need to learn math, they need to learn English, and they need to learn science. But
Right.
how are we expanding their horizons? And I'm saying this as someone who, like, I'm gonna be honest, I was exposed to art when I was in the 6th grade at my middle school at McCormick. And I was like, just give me a basketball, because I wanted to play basketball. So that was me. But there are students who, like, you allow them to start painting, and then they're the next Picasso, right? And so we need to make sure that they have that room to explore, because you often can't be what you can't see, and you don't know what you can be if you're not exposed to it, right? So like, how do I know that maybe one day I would want to be a graphic designer if I didn't have the opportunity to explore my creativity? So 100% I agree with what you said, Jamari.
Yeah, I like that quote too.
Yeah,
I like that quote. Moving on to our 5th question. Within BPS, there is not always a staff that reflects the student population. You mentioned if you're elected as city councilor, you will advocate for more diverse staff in BPS.
yeah.
How do you think BPS can improve their recruiting efforts, as well as their retaining efforts for teachers and staff of color? What do you think are the biggest issues?
Yeah. So I'm going to put my lawyer hat on just for 1 second. There was a court order in 1974 by Judge Garrity saying that BPS needs to bring up its percentage of teachers of color. I think for Black teachers, it needed to be at 25%. And the BPS has done not a great job of meeting that target. The times when BPS has done a great job of like slightly exceeding that 25% is when the BPS's Office of Equity had sign-off authority when schools would hire staff, hire new teachers. And so you get, again, this is what it means to embed equity into everything you do. It means that you are not just paying lip service, is that you are enforcing it by saying, oh, you're about to hire new teachers, come to the equity office and let's talk for a bit. Let me sign off on these new hires. That sign off is a check and balance on the idea that if we need to hire more teachers of color, more BIPOC teachers, let's make sure that we're doing that by having sign-off authority in central office, in the equity office, the office charged with making sure that equity is part of our framework. And, that sign-off authority was done away with, it disappeared. And then you get a drop in the number of Black teachers that are entering BPS. So let's bring back that sign-off authority so that our Office of Equity is looking at all of our schools and saying, this school has had a trend of not hiring teachers, Black teachers or Latinx teachers. Like, we can do better. Like, let's be careful when they're bringing their sheets to us to sign off and ask them and make sure we're questioning them on why they aren't doing a better job of recruiting teachers of color. There are a number of grad schools here that have education schools, and there are a number of Black and Latinx kids, Latinx students in those schools. Are we present there and recruiting them to teach at our schools, to become leaders at our schools? We know principal turnover is a big reason for why our schools, some of our schools aren't succeeding. So if we get better leadership, both in central office and in our schools, all of our students will benefit. Again, about like thinking outside of the box. Can BPS have a specific targeted partnership with a school like UMass or with another local school where we are intentionally building and churning out and depending on Black teachers, Latinx teachers that come out of these pipeline programs that we partner with? There are a lot of things that you can do if you need to increase, Black and Latinx staff. It's about how committed are you to getting it done. A simple fix would be to bring back the sign-off authority to the equity office. But another fix is being proactively at these schools and recruiting the graduates of color to make sure that they know that BPS is a home for them. And then this is the last thing I'll say, is that we got to all work on making Boston be and exist as a more inclusive and welcoming city to young Black and Latinx professionals.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, that's huge.
Yep.
Yeah. I've been in rooms where in terms of like hiring staff of color, and some of the pushback will be like they're not ready or they don't fit the system. So when we get pushback like that, like, can we, and you touch on it, like you said, like, those schools, but even like some people after they've gone through those programs, they feel like they're not ready to fit the model they fit them. So therefore, it feels like Black and brown educators will never fit those models because if they're not ready. So is there a possibility, like, there could be like, beside the pipeline from the school, is there another like bridge for them to come in and just like, because you learn on the job, so
Yeah.
like having that opportunity to come in and learn on the job and not hiring them because because I've heard that a lot. So it's just like, if we don't fit the model, the environment, then change the model and the environment to fit us, because this like our representation of Black and brown students. So yeah.
Rudy, you
I,
said it. You said it.
yeah.
It's like change, like, are they the problem or are we the problem?
Yeah.
And that equity actually demands that you ask that question, right? Like, we often want to shift the responsibility and the barrier to the communities and folks of color, like, oh, they're not ready, or they don't have the skills, or they don't have the training, or they don't have the grades, or they wait. Maybe it's us. Let's take a mirror. Like, what is about our institution that we need to change to be a place that can accept and receive talent of color, Black teachers, Latinx teachers, all types of teachers that are underrepresented. We sure we need more teachers who are, differently abled, who are themselves, went through the special education pipeline. Like, where are they showing up in our schools? And so I think it's like, wait a minute, do we need to change and not them? And I think we do need to ask ourselves that question.
Yeah, I also think it makes me think about our previous podcast episode with two teachers that we had on, and it's too many times that we try to like quantify what equitable or equity looks like, and I feel like, quantify it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily, and I'm learning this, it's not necessarily the numbers that kind of make it like, oh, this school is just great because they have so many Black teachers and like this, that, and the third. But I feel like equity is like feeling welcome, feeling heard, feeling seen, and all these things. And one of the reasons why so many teachers leave or they stay 1 year is that they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they feel like their voices don't matter, and there's no checks and balances in schools really, to help teachers of color through or stay or have them express their feelings about what's going on. And it's like like Rudy was saying, it's either you're with the program, you fit this mold of the school, or you're out, or you're being pushed out.
Yeah. That's why it's really important to support affinity groups wherever you find them. So whether it's BEAM or something, another environment where, you can feel welcome. But that was an excellent point, Jamari. So much about equity too is about, where do I feel welcome? Whether we are talking about the city of Boston, right? Whether we are talking about the school system, a lot of this, and whether it's talking about unionizing, right, and protecting, fighting for a safe work environment, fighting for better pay, fighting for dignity. A lot of this is about a lot of the conversation, I think, boils down to dignity and how you make people feel, and whether I feel like I belong, right? So much. Yesterday I was speaking at a Stop AAPI Hate Rally, and a lot of this is about, like, how do we make folks feel like this is their city, this is our school, and so our voice matters and should be centered in this debate, right? When you look at Boston is a majority people of color city, right? It is a majority city with Black and Latinx and Asian and other faces, right? And so we need to see that in our leadership, we need to see that in our schools, we need to see that in our restaurants, we need to see that in our political makeup, right? Because there is richness in all of the different communities that we have. The Haitian community, the Trinidadian, the African American, the Cambodian, the Vietnamese, the Irish, the Italian, the Polish, the Brazilian, the Cape Verdean. There is richness in all of that. And so how are we making sure that everyone feels welcome and everyone's voice is valued, whether that's in central office or in our schools? And the attrition happens when, like, I don't feel like I'm supported, which is an issue at Boston Latin School when I was there. The Black and Latinx kids who leave are kids who didn't feel like they were fully supported and didn't feel like they could find their place. So how do we do a better job of building support systems? You know, I worked at the Posse Foundation after I graduated from undergrad.
Where's the Posse?
You know Posse?
He's a
Yeah,
Posse.
I went to Center College.
Oh, get out. Were you in DC?
No, I was in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, my sister's Posse.
Okay.
Posse Bryn Mawr. So
hey.
But like, look at Posse, right? The whole idea is that we all do better when we're supported, when we feel like we have community. And that goes for school, that goes for work, and you know, that goes for church. That's why we have all these groups and communities that you can be a part of so that you can feel seen. So yeah, this is just like a long response to your answer and me agreeing and affirming everything and elevating everything that you said, Jamari, because it's right. Like there is a big part of equity, also rooted in history, because so much of it has been about excluding us. How do we include us? How do we normalize the richness of all of who we are, right? How do we normalize our diversity? I really think that like, I want to move away from, we talk a lot about diversity and it's great to celebrate that, but like, really it's about normalizing a society in which all of these voices are equal and feel like they have a say that is just as good as a person sitting next to them. So
right.
As we strive for a more equitable school system, we very often think about who will benefit from that system. Knowing that gentrification is happening, how will you use your experience as a lawyer and advocate with MAHA to fight and prevent gentrification as a city councilor?
Great question, Rudy. So yeah, I've been a member, an activist, and attorney with MAHA, and so yeah, that gives me a lot of experience. But I've been doing this from years back. So this is my topic. This is what I care about. Housing, right? We often talk about housing as if it's some sort of reward, right? But it's a right. It's a human right. It's the problem is that housing is your most expensive commodity, but it is a right. We need to make sure that folks have access to the basics. The basics are food, shelter, healthcare, good education, and a job with dignity, right? Those are the basics. And so, you know, when as an attorney, I represented families facing eviction in Boston Housing Court, facing eviction and foreclosure. So I know firsthand the role of displacement in our communities. I was representing folks in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, East Boston, everywhere around the city, because this was the height of the foreclosure crisis, where banks were getting off scot-free and really our families were hurting. And so when we talk about, you know, needing to be having intentional policies that are working for working class families, I'm talking about my time standing up in court, trying to make sure I can get this family to stay in their homes, and fighting back tears when I'm in front of a judge saying, no, we need to work out a plan with the opposing counsel to make sure that this family can stay in their home. And so when we're talking about this city, it has become unaffordable, right? It is hard for families to stay here. We have a city and a city government that has really been, you know, has had developers, you know, basically leading our city planning, and that just can't happen. We need to make sure that we are building buildings and communities that are responsive to what the community needs. And folks are asking and demanding for affordable housing and home ownership. So my work with MAHA has been on, you know, making sure that we are expanding first generation home ownership opportunities, right? Folks who don't have the bank of mom and dad for a down payment or for closing costs. But these are working class families. These are essential workers in our city who during the pandemic were forced to go to work. And you're telling me that we can't make this a city where they can rent a home, where they can buy a home and create equity and intergenerational wealth for their families? You know, we all talk about the statistic about the median wealth of a Black family is $8 compared to $247,500 for a white family. There's a lot we can do to shrink that. We need to be judicious and intentional, right? Again, intentionality is very important. Intentional about how we're using city land, right? Because that gets out of cost. It's city land, that's our land. Let's land that BPDA is sitting on. Let's use that land to develop affordable home ownership and rental opportunities. Let's think about our inclusionary development policy, which is the residential requirement for builders who are building residential properties, right? Our IDP right now only requires 13% of new builds to be affordable, right? A 13% IDP policy is, I think, a displacement policy because you're not creating enough affordable housing. But like Somerville, it's at least 20%. So we need to increase that number. We increase the fees that we charge commercial developers so that we can have more money in cities' coffers to build affordable housing. There's so much we need to do. I can talk about this forever. We need to support community land trust. We need to make sure that we are working with groups like the Pine Street Inn, experts on building supportive housing. We need zoning relief for 100% affordable housing. We can do that. Our zoning code is outdated. So I plan to bring my legal muscle. I love negotiating, my negotiating muscle, my advocacy muscle, to make sure that we are ensuring housing as a human right, a housing first framework. You house people, then you give them the support that they need to create stable lives for them and their families. It is essential, it is important. We are a prosperous city with a AAA bond rating. That prosperity is not felt by our working class families. And it's something that makes me so upset. If you can feel that, because it's like, we have families who don't have food to eat. We have families who don't have a place to stay. And there's so much we can do if we are intentional about how we're using our city budget. So if you tell me you care about something, show me your budget and let that be reflected in how you're spending your money. And so that's what I care about. I will bring all of my weight to this issue because it's something that I care about so deeply. The city is unaffordable and we need to do everything we can for our working class families here.
Yeah. I like how you say that we need to, like, housing is a right, and also we need to get them housing and also give them support to build their stuff, not support so you can keep them in the cycle, because that's what it feels like, because we're getting support so we can stay in that cycle and always depending on the government. No, we need support so we can start like building our wealth, so we don't have to rely on the government. That's the kind of support we need. So I'm so happy you say that, definitely. So for one question that we ask every official that comes in, because we are striving to build a more politically engaged alumni community, and part of being community engaged is also, like, one of the biggest factor of BPS is the school committee. So we are curious to know if you see any benefit to a fully elected Boston School Committee.
Yes, I think there are benefits, with accountability and transparency. You're more accountable to the voters when you have a fully elected school committee. We're the only city in the state in the Commonwealth that doesn't have a fully elected committee. So I'm on board with a fully elected committee. I'm on board also with 2 students on the school committee. I have been the only student already on a Boston school committee, and it is a lonely and isolating experience.
Yeah.
You get 2 students on there so they feel like they have support. Again, support is an important theme of mine.
Yes.
So they feel like they have support and that their voices matter and are centered, and give them voting power. So my concerns are with, elections are expensive, right? I'm running for office. We've been doing a good job fundraising. We raised $50,000 for 24 hours, and we're still, doing really well in terms of fundraising. But elections are expensive, and sometimes they can get subject to private capture, private interests, can come in. So I worry about things like that. But I do think that the trade-offs with like accountability and transparency and a more involved and engaged school committee will benefit all of our students, right? I'm all for, the definition of stupidity, I think they say, is doing the same thing over and over again. So like, let's do something different, Yes. So. And we've had an fully elected school committee in the past. Boston has changed. Then we can go back to that model.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, Ruthzee Louijeune, candidate for City Councilor at Large. Where and how can people reach out to you?
Yes, awesome. So to find out more about my campaign and to help us to victory on September 14th, which is when you can go out and vote for us on September 14th, go to ruthzeeforboston.com. That's RUTHZEE for Boston.com. You can make a donation of whatever amounts, whether it's $10, $5, or $20 or $100. Every dollar helps us get out to more voters, knock on doors. As a daughter of this city, I grew up here and was raised here. I love it. And we can make this a better, more equitable, more city where we're all sharing in the prosperity. I'm also on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the gram. I'm on Facebook. So you can find me everywhere. I'm very accessible. I want to hear what people think. Part of running for office, the biggest part is about listening. I care a lot about policy, but I really care about constituent services. There's a pothole on your street, or there's something else that needs to be fixed, or my neighbor doesn't have food. I care about that. I want to show up, and I've been showing up. I want to show up for you, whether you live in Eastie, Southie, Mission Hill, Back Bay, Mattapan, Roxbury, Dorchester, Ruthzee. I care about everybody in the city and every neighborhood. So I thank you for allowing me to come on this platform.
Talking about my neighbor, there's one more thing. I heard a story of where somebody was being evicted and you went to them.
Yeah. So I ran an eviction clinic every Friday. So one of the problems with housing court is that there aren't enough attorneys to meet the legal needs of everyone. And so we would hold an eviction clinic, and on Fridays, and they would have to go to court then the following Thursday. So we would help them fill out their paperwork on that Friday. But there were times where especially elderly folks couldn't make it out to our eviction clinic. And so they would call us and ask us to come and help them fill out their paperwork to preserve their rights, which increases the likelihood that they'll be able to stay in their home, right? Housing court is not a good place to be. It's a court that really you're damned because you're poor, and oftentimes it's women of color with children. But this woman who called us up, she was an elderly Polish American woman living in Reedville, and she was a senior, and they were trying to kick her out. Some of these corporate landlords are very ruthless, and so on I think it was a Saturday, a friend and we drove out to her home, and we helped her fill out her paperwork, and she was so nice. She was so grateful. She gave us I think tea, and she introduced us to classical music, and she gave me this picture of a cat in a hat that I kept in my wallet for 8 years, but I've since lost it. I hope to find it again. Part of being a city councilor at large is meeting people where they are. So that means you need me to go to your house to help you with your legal paperwork so that you can stay in your home. I'm gonna do that. That's who I am. That's what I'm about.
That's so dope. So dope. Just wanted to say thank you again, and we will be right back with our final thoughts.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come, Rudy and Jamari. I appreciate you.
Merci. Thank you. Good luck with your campaign.
Thank you.
We are back. I'm here with Rudy. We are gonna be going over our final thoughts about our special guest. And what was your thoughts, Rudy?
It was a great conversation. I enjoy it. You can see she's passionate about what she does. Yeah. Especially one of the questions we ask is how she's gonna bring her experience as a lawyer and advocate from Maha to, because we talking about creating a system that benefit student, but at the same time, Black and Brown students are being displaced from the community. So the work we do in making sure it's a system that works for us, we make sure that people are still they still in the city to benefit from the system. And I like how she said housing is we look at housing as a reward, but it's a right. That was very powerful to me. And what's also was very powerful is the fact that when she said creating program, a system that will help people stay in their housing, but creating pathway for them to build wealth, resources to build wealth, not system that they can keep, if not create a cycle where they have to keep depending on the government. No, creating a system that they can build upon, educate themselves, create wealth for their family, so they don't stay in the system for long or for their whole life. So I'm definitely about that, because we need government support, but we also there's people who need it and they deserve it. There's no shame in it. But at the same time, how do we empower those people to be self-sufficient?
Yeah, I think that's definitely key. And not something that I really liked when talking about, the housing situation is how do we equip people with the necessary tools to be successful? And I like that you said that how do we help them but not like kind of cripple them at the same time, you know? And we see that with, you know, with so many of the government help, like essentials to people, you know, relying on like sometimes food stamps and like, you know, vouchers and like all those other things. Those are definitely needed. I'm not
Yes, they
saying
are.
that they're not, but what are you giving to the people to help them grow? Are
Yeah.
you helping them with like classes to get them a better job or anything like that to help supplement, you know, that help? So I definitely am on the same page regarding that. And I don't know, I could just feel the energy from her.
The
Even
passion is there.
yeah, the passion is there, man. And I think her being young and also having a fresh outlook and being and representing like a group of people that are not usually represented and sometimes overlooked within our community, and giving them a voice is definitely like something I feel passionately about too. And having her, you know, come on and talk about that has been great. um One of the things I did want to touch on is like the racial equity framework, and just where we can implement after school programs. And I know I mentioned having more art programs or music programs within the school. I feel is so important, and I'm glad, you know, she feels the same. But you know, one of the things that she touched on is like we really need to dig deep and look at the history of equity and the framework and realize that it has been systematically put in place that it doesn't benefit Black and Brown students and like adults even. And we kind of have to like rethink it in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, I know that we have people on that have kind of overarching talked about it, but for me, I feel like it's the first time where it's like, yo, we have to really rethink this and start from scratch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely. Rebuild the foundation, create system.
Yeah,
Definitely, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of commitment, but it's time. We
yeah,
we 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 gotta continue having conversation, but we also need to start seeing action,
yeah,
and that's why we like we are educating ourselves. We're having those conversations. Just like we need to show showcase our voice and commitment to the change because enough is enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. But overall, I thought it was great, man. It's a fresh perspective, and I'm ready to like I'm really looking forward to see how her campaign pans out, and I hope the people, you know, give her a chance.
Definitely.
Yeah. So with that being said, straight out of BPS.
Podcast.
See you later, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Till next time.